By the late feminist poet and essayist, Adrienne Rich. In those years, people will say, we lost track of the meaning of we. Of you, we found ourselves reduced to I, and the whole thing became silly, ironic, terrible. We were trying to live a personal life, and yes, that was the only life we could bear witness to. But the great dark birds of history screamed and plunged into our personal weather. They were headed somewhere else. But their beaks and pinions drove along the shore, through the rags of fog where we stood, saying, I.
Would you harbor me? Would I harbor you? Would you harbor a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a heretic, convict, or spy? Would you? In these lyrics to a song created for Sweet Honey in the Rock, Unitarian Universalist Issei Barnwell asks some fundamental spiritual questions. Will you be there for me? Will I be there for you even though we're so different? What is my responsibility for others, the people I don't even know? How did Martha and Wait Still Sharp answer that question in 1939? Just check in here, who has seen the new film Defying the Nazis, The Sharps' War, that aired on PBS this week? Quite a few of you. Great. If you have not seen it yet, I can't recommend it highly enough. Seriously. You can view it online at pbs.org until October 5th, or you can borrow the DVD at our church library. This is a story worth knowing. It's a story about stepping up to defy hate. Martha and Wait Still Sharp answered a call to action in 1939 that took them far, far from their home and Unitarian congregation in Wellesley, Massachusetts, into danger and intrigue in war-torn Europe as they worked to save people from certain death during the evil Nazi regime. They left the comfort of their home and their 2 small children with relatives so that they could answer a calling, a sacred calling, much larger than themselves. They risked their own lives over and over as they rescued people throughout the war and afterwards helped refugees. The film dramatically tells of their work, worthy of any spy thriller novel, except more real, because their bold and brilliant work really happened and really did save lives. The Sharps were not James Bond, but ordinary Americans, ordinary Unitarians who felt deeply moved by the plight of people being oppressed by the Nazis. Jews, intellectuals, scientists, journalists, novelists, clergy, and others who opposed the Nazis. Wade Still was a Unitarian minister with a Harvard Law degree. Martha was a social worker and the minister's wife, a role that required her being her husband's right hand. I could use one of those. Yeah, I want one. I want one. Just saying. If you want help with that job description, I can keep you busy. When they were asked to embark on this dangerous mission by the newly formed Unitarian Service Committee, they were the 18th couple to be asked. 17 others had declined. But they said yes, believing that they were called to this great task by something larger than themselves. As Adrian Rich expressed, the great dark birds of history screamed and plunged into their personal weather. What calls people like the Sharps and other ordinary people to do these kinds of extraordinary things in the face of great evil? Now, we've been talking about covenant for the month of September, and my sense is that this is about the greater covenant, that greater covenant that called to their hearts. Now, what's that about, that greater covenant? My colleague, Susan Frederick Gray, who is one of the candidates running for the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, offers this perspective about this greater sense of covenant. She says, our lives are inextricably bound with the lives of others, even if we choose not to see those threads. Being part of a covenantal faith acknowledges those threads and then asks this question: given that we are connected, given that we are siblings, given that we share a future, a planet, a world, how then shall we live? She reminds us that humanism is an influential part of our religious tradition. And one of the fundamental teachings of humanism is the notion that ours are the only hands we have to shape what happens in the world. Fundamentally, humanity is all connected and we share a common destiny. So we ask the question, whose are we? We are fundamentally connected, bound to one another. Who needs us? We do need one another. Because of this, our covenants call to us not just into relationship with one another, but into relationship with a larger calling. Our covenant is not just an agreement of how we will live together, but an essential statement of what we hope to become together. Another colleague, Reverend Sarah Lawal, who serves up in Boise, Idaho, points out that our despair and our grief that we feel about the state of the world is our spiritual response calling us to action. She says this: we can't grow spiritually and we cannot deepen our faith or our religious lives without connection to others, without engagement with deeper connection to humanity. Our Unitarian Universalist tradition and principles speak to this understanding rather clearly in our commitment not only to the inherent worth and dignity of all people, but also our understanding of interdependence, where our choices, actions, and words have consequences beyond our individual selves and lives. If we live our lives cut off and disconnected from our fellow human beings, no moral vision is possible. When we ground ourselves in this interconnection, we cannot help but feel a greater vision of what is possible, a vision fueled by our values, our liberal religious values of compassion, love, and justice. Our choice to be the love is how we actively defy hate. Now, quite honestly, I wish that our world was as simple as little 6-year-old Alex writing out his big-hearted letter of invitation to Omran, the young Syrian refugee. My heart longs for that simple open-heartedness where people just help each other without counting the cost of doing so. For we each live in several different kinds of covenantal relationships. Those in our families, those with our marriages and our intimate partnerships, those with our fellow congregants here at church. And for some of us, those with our relationship with those we work with every day. These kinds of relationships are to be honored as sacred covenantal bonds. But I know for myself that watching the film about the Sharps brought to mind their sacrifices and the sacrifices that I and my family, my daughters, Petra and Greta, have made over the years so that I can serve as a Unitarian Universalist minister and social justice activist. And yet, by the very nature of covenant, it's understood that life is never perfect. Sometimes we will choose to sacrifice one form of covenant over another for a while. We all face this kind of choice from time to time in different ways in our lives, like choosing to focus perhaps on caring for elderly parents at the expense of engaging with our own children, or perhaps making the covenant to focus on career or school at the expense of family. It was heartbreaking for me to learn that the Sharps ultimately divorced after going through so much together. These are the very real risks, but we're called to make these kinds of choices throughout our lives, navigating them as compassionately as we ever can. And now, at this time, seriously, we are being asked to defy hate in ways that we've never had to face before. There are a few of us here in this room who did face the Nazis. Janet Shipton, Beverly Daly, they were around to face the Nazis. The rest of us have not had to face Nazis in our daily lives. But right now we're facing lots of hate spewing out in different directions. Now, none of us are going to receive personal phone calls from Peter Morales, the current president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, asking us to go on a life-threatening and life-affirming mission to a danger spot somewhere around the globe. We're not going to get that kind of call that Wade Still and Marcia Sharp got personally. But our faith is asking us to reflect individually and collectively as a congregation about how we will defy hate in our time. And gosh and golly, the possibilities seem rather endless right now. I could stand up here and give you a list that could go on all afternoon, but I won't. But here are some of the things that speak most strongly to my heart, and I imagine they speak to you as well. Yes, one could give up everything we're doing right now and go over to Europe and work with refugee relief organizations. Same thing in Africa. We could try to rescue children in Aleppo and other war-torn places. But you don't have to travel away from Ogden. You can defy hate right here at home. Think about this. How can we support our Muslim neighbors who are literally 2 blocks up this street at a time when they may be in danger of hate crimes or even deportation or internment, depending on who gets elected in November? What are we going to do with the world where our Muslim neighbors are being compared to Skittles? You know what I'm talking about from this week. How can we support refugees who are being resettled right here in Ogden? Now, we don't have people from Syria coming here because the U.S. government has not assigned us refugees from that part of the world. But they have assigned us to have refugees from Africa. More families from the Democratic Republic of Congo are expected to arrive in the coming year, and they will be needing loving, compassionate companioning as they integrate into American life here in Utah. So the question comes up, are we willing to be trained as refugee resettlement volunteers to be sure that they experience love and not hate when they arrive and as they learn to be Americans? And of course, how could we not mention this? How will we continue our commitment to addressing racism here in Ogden amidst the tensions of the ongoing murders of innocent African Americans at the hands of police in cities across our nation? How will we truly step up as allies with our black and brown neighbors in this city? How many of us will make the commitment to show up at events like the town hall conversations on race so that we can build relationships that defy hate? How many of us are really willing to get to know our neighbors? And by the way, thank you to the 10 of us who participated in last Saturday's conversation on race. Your presence was duly noted, not just by me as your minister, but by the community. Thank you. Just this week, my Unitarian Universalist colleagues, my ministerial colleagues in Charlotte, faced bullets and tear gas as they joined other clergy in witnessing and counseling during the public demonstrations following the murder of Keith Scott. One of my colleagues barely missed the bullet that took down the man standing right next to him. And yet day after day, this week, my colleagues stood and marched with the other concerned citizens in Charlotte, defying hate. Are we prepared to do that? If that happens here in Ogden or perhaps down in Salt Lake? And let me be clear, let me be very clear, defying hate is not always about dodging bullets or rescuing people from Nazis. Thank God. Thank God. But it may mean putting yourself out of your comfort zone. Or it may mean that you want to just defy hate in some low-key but still very important ways. There's a blue insert in your order of service. Pull it out. You'll see that there's a variety of suggestions from the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. Some of the suggestions are for you individually, and some are for the congregation to consider as collective possibilities. I urge you to review these ideas and reflect on how you plan to defy hate, and also give your ideas to our leaders. Give them to our board of trustees, give them to me, give them to Trista as our new director of religious exploration. Talk among yourselves. See what comes up for you. Just this week, a meme has made the rounds on Facebook that spoke to me. It is unattributed in Facebook, but I looked it up and I discovered that the source was Adrienne Marie Brown, an African-American writer, activist, and scholar of the science fiction novelist Octavia Butler. She lives in Detroit, and this is what she said. Things are not getting worse. They are just getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight and continue to pull back the veil. Pull back the veil. As we stay awake and engaged, the veil clouding our vision will continue to lift. Ways to divide hate as it is unmasked will start to reveal themselves in fresh and meaningful ways. It is up to each of us to pay attention, to open our hearts wide, wider than ever before, and to answer the call of love and justice when it comes. So much depends on our action. So much depends on our love. Let's be ready to change the world as we honor the Great Covenant. May it be so. Our hearts continue to be broken again and again as we see people of color killed by police when circumstances did not warrant a violent course of action. Starting this morning, we will say the names of the people recently killed as a way of lamenting their deaths in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. Our names this week are Terrence Crutcher, age 40, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Dahir Adam, age 22, St. Cloud, Minnesota. Keith Scott, age 43, Charlotte, North Carolina. Please join me in singing the first verse of hymn number 95. Just the first verse. There's more love somewhere. This is our sung response of lament.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere.
I invite you all to open your hearts this morning in a time of prayer and reflection. This is our sacred time, just once a week, when we can collectively focus our compassion in loving solidarity. Let us quietly open our hearts together. Let us pray. O Spirit of love and life, God known by so many names and by none, help us to open our hearts. Open them ever wider as we embrace the big love that calls us right now. Help us to open our hearts to those who are closest to us, those who are entrusted to our care, those who form the intimate circles of our lives. Let us be there for them to ease their souls in times of grief and trouble. Let us be there to savor the sweetness of life and celebrate its goodness and beauty. Help us to open our hearts beyond that close circle of love to embrace our neighbors and those across town, the people we know and the ones we haven't met yet. Let us be there for them as we listen to their stories of the realities of their lives. Let us be there with gracious generosity to share what we can so that all may flourish. Help us open our hearts to the cries of people far beyond our beautiful mountain valley. Those in detention camps on the border, those in refugee camps, those trapped in war towns like Aleppo, those camped with the Standing Rock Sioux in North Dakota, those afraid to drive to the store for being fearful of being shot while driving while black or brown, those protesting in Charlotte and every place where human dignity is not being honored. Let us be there for them as they cry out in pain and despair. Let us not turn away, but look and listen full on so that we may embrace them as our own. Let us each consider how we are called to bear witness, to offer compassionate aid, to work for justice, keeping in mind the sage words of Adrienne Rich, who said, "My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world." May we, dear Spirit of love and life, be those courageous ones who reconstitute the world with our love, our compassion, and our thirst for justice. We've each come here this morning with people who are in and on our hearts, people who we wish to hold in love, or perhaps in memory at this time, so that this whole community can embrace these people with loving compassion. Please call them to mind and then say their names aloud now. We are held in a great love by this community, our dearest loved ones, and the spirit of life that holds and sustains us as we walk through our times of joy and sorrow together. Let's enter a time of sacred silence so that we can hear what our hearts need to speak to us. Shalom, salam, shanti, blessed be. Amen.
And as we keep our hearts open, let's turn in our teal hymnals to 1013. Open my heart. And if the congregation will sing that with me 6 times through, the choir will sing the round with us after our 3rd time through. Again, that's 1013. Open my heart.